over the past several months, actually in the past year for some of the research. It thought it'd be good to get his perspectives on what's been going on with some of the forest management and how that might relate to some of the climate change work that we're doing in the north central region. This is a reminder, we're recording this, and with that, I'll just turn it over to Jason.
Great, thanks, Dennis. We'll get going here. Yes, I'm Jason Sibold. I am in the Department of Anthropology. Oops. Is that better to use that? Maybe is this a little touchy? I am actually a geographer, though. I was hired to start a geography department, which I think we're about a year and a half away from, I hope, or a program, I should say, at this point in time. We've scaled back our hopes and dreams, but we will have a degree in geography here and not too long from now. And I'm a biogeographer, and I work on forest ecosystems, climate change, disturbance, and adaptation. I didn't get into this initially. All of my initial work as a graduate student was backwards and historic range variability using tree rings, looking at the last 500 to 1,000 years, trying to understand how we've gotten to where we are today, and where, how we might get systems back in alignment following impacts of ecosystem management. And then all of a sudden, climate change happened. And I started to realize more and more that looking back 500 to 1,000 years just wasn't as applicable. We were seeing things on a yearly basis that just did not agree with a lot of the things that we would find in the tree ring record. So we in my lab still do a little bit of tree ring work here and there, but a lot of the work that we do now focuses on kind of climate variability, forest response to climate variability over the last 15 years primarily, but we also go back to the 1970s and to present. So kind of the last 10 to 40 recent years, and the dynamics that we see there is we feel like it's most appropriate to guide management and managers. So today I'm going to talk about try to address this question, can salvage logging assist in forest system adaptation to climate change? I don't know how familiar people are with salvage logging, but it is the big, bad environmental no-no. As soon as you say salvage logging, the Wilderness Society gets more donations. People start looking for their paper products to write signs about no salvage logging and what have you. So this is big, bad, negative kind of environmental perspective. So I'm asking, hey, could we actually use it to assist adaptation to climate change? Which is an absolutely crazy thought. If you know anything about salvage logging, it's thought of as death and destruction. But I'm going to pitch an idea here that, hey, maybe with the right tools and the right perspectives, maybe we could take an ongoing project that's in Colorado in response to spruce beetle outbreak, I would argue in response to climate change changes that we're seeing in our forest landscape, and use the ecosystem response to salvage logging as a tool to assist in adaptation to climate change. So, real quick overview, I want to talk about forest adaptation to climate change theory, then I want to talk a little bit about the reality of what we actually see on the ground, and then get into this Gunnison National Forest example. I've been working there for about 2.5 years now, and I've agreed to a 12-year agreement with Gunnison and Compadre and Grand Mesa National Forest to help them understand their ecosystem response and help develop ecosystem adaptation tools and perspectives and management policies that are very dynamic in time and space. I'll talk about that current situation, what I'm doing, and then this idea of how we might be able to incorporate climate change science into management decisions. So real quick, this is going to be speedy theory. On the top bar here, let's see if I can use the pointer to show. We've got projection. This is the year 2000, or the present distribution of Engelmann spruce, and down here we've got for the present distribution, and then the species distribution model, distribution, expected distribution in 2030, 2060 here, and 2090. This is from work by Rayfelt et al. In 2006. So we see if we follow Colorado, the Engelmann spruce in Colorado through time, we've got a large distribution now, and it's slowly shrinking through time. This is a species that likes cooler, wetter conditions. In contrast, we've got Douglas fir that's much more drought tolerant, current distribution, and it's expected to expand on the landscape. So that's part of the theory of how things are going to play out here. The other big thing, of course, is that things will have to move in Colorado here. Species are going to have to move upslope as things warm up to be able to track their climate. So we've got all these forest types moving upslope, and unfortunately for Engelmann spruce, it's going to be probably squeezed by the lack of soils and conditions at its upper limit. But the idea is that these things move upslope. There's also part of this theory says that if these sites are occupied by existing vegetation, it's going to really greatly slow down their upslope movement in mountainous regions. So if we have a disturbance, ecological disturbance that takes out the trees, so we've just lost a tree here, we can actually open up that site and allow these grasses to move up, in this case, into the ponderosa pine zone. If we have another disturbance, a fire, a windstorm, bark beetle outbreak, we lose that lodgepole pine. It's going to allow ponderosa and Douglas fir to move up there, and likewise lodgepole to move up here. So disturbance can mediate, can facilitate this migration of species upslope is the idea. And we know disturbances are linked, like disturbances like wildfires here, are linked to climate variability, and in particular warmer, more extreme conditions. This is some work by Westerling looking at how fires in the western U.S. are so closely linked, coupled with the length of the fire season, which is linked closely with how much snowpack we have and the melt-out date of snowpack. So in theory, this disturbance is going to ride to the rescue. It's going to open up these sites and let species migrate. So here we see a burned forest in Glacier National Park, and we have lodgepole pine moving upslope in this photo into areas that it wasn't previously. So that's the theory. The reality, I want to walk you through Colorado here, starting in the year 2000. We're not going to dwell too much on details. The brown, blue, and purples are bark beetle infestations, and then the red patches will be fires. So in theory, we should see, if climate starts to shift, we should see an uptick in these climate-linked disturbances like bark beetles and wildfires, and we can just kind of walk through 2000 to 2015, these disturbances. As Colorado started to warm up in 2000, we see lots of spruce beetle activity, lots of mountain pine beetle activity, and we start to have quite a few fires. We're up to 2006. We've got a lot of change in 15 years. Spruce beetle is really growing in the south here. Mountain pine beetle slows down because it's eaten everything that it can eat. 2014 and 2015. So we went from this map without a whole lot of disturbance in the previous maybe 80, 100 years to now we've got just tremendous amounts of beetles and fire. So disturbance is doing what it's supposed to do. It's riding to the rescue, and it's going to facilitate migration of species upslope and into places that these species are better adapted to reside in. So we thought this was great, some graduate students and I, and that we wanted to test to see if this was happening. A lot of what's happening right now are bark beetle outbreaks. On the left here is a bark beetle outbreak. This is a spruce beetle outbreak, high severity, hardly any surviving trees. And on the right is that example from Glacier with wildfire. Turns out migration facilitated by disturbance is contingent on disturbance type. That we actually see bark beetle outbreaks are not shifting species upslope. We're generally seeing that bark beetle outbreaks are creating these sites that are opening up opportunities for establishment, but they're also sites that hold a lot of moisture on the ground. because they're dropping a lot of needles and small twigs and branches onto the ground. All of that helps maintain moisture and retain moisture at the site. You also still have a lot of shading in these sites. So it's shaded, you have a lot of potential to retain moisture, and we actually see species moving the wrong direction oftentimes in bark beetle impacted sites. So they're moving downslope. We see Engelmann spruce, for example, and subalpine fir moving downslope previously lodgepole pine-dominated sites that are actually drier sites, but because of seed production and the conditions at those sites, they are moving into these drier places on the landscape. So they are moving in the wrong direction for adaptation, in other words. These species are not well adapted to drought stress, and they can die even without a disturbance just from drought stress. In contrast, fire appears to be a really good mechanism because it creates these really harsh sites, bare mineral soil, very little potential for retaining moisture in those soils, and very little shading compared to this beetle-impacted site. So the seedlings that are getting established here are seedlings that are pretty drought and heat adapted and tolerant. So fire can facilitate migration, but we're not seeing that beetles are doing that. So this idea that disturbance can ride to the rescue, we need a little asterisk there, and we need to say it's contingent on the type of disturbance. We can't just say disturbance. All disturbance will facilitate migration. So I want to shift now from this kind of, here's the big picture, to the Gunnison National Forest and what's going on there. Gunnison National Forest is roughly, it's the Gunnison Basin here. It's draining out this way. It's roughly in this circle here with the town of Gunnison in the center. You see all that purple here. They have a lot of high-severity spruce beetle outbreak in the last 5 to 8 years in this area. And this is high severity in terms of a lot of the plots that we measure severity. It's almost always over 90% mortality of overstory stems by the time the outbreak is done, and it's frequently more along the lines of 99, 100% mortality in the plots that we put in. So we've got this massive outbreak going on. We do have Douglas fir and other drought-tolerant species on the edge of the spruce fir forest. But like I said before, they are not being facilitated to migrate up into these areas because of the site types that are being created here. The response to this has been what's a proposed 60,000-acre spruce salvage operation. So this is where they're going in and they're harvesting dead trees, dead standing trees. And this sounds like it's doesn't have such a large impact or anything, but the fact of the matter is you have seedlings that are establishing in these sites, in these post-beetle sites, and then you're coming in with a lot of equipment, large equipment, you're skidding logs, you're tearing up the soil, et cetera. And on the face of it, yeah, that sounds like a bad situation in terms of impact, but in reality, you could also make the argument that through salvage logging, and this, to put this in context, 60,000 acres of salvage logging. They also want to do over the next 10 years, 60,000 acres of non-commercial treatments, mostly in aspen forests, so prescribed fire mostly. So 120,000 acres proposed for treatment within this one. Well, that actually covers 2 other national forests adjacent here, but within this one region of Colorado. It's hard to quantify this and put this in terms of other things, but in other projects, but 60,000 salvage acres, that's by far the largest salvage project Colorado would have ever imagined seeing. This is probably the largest harvest that Colorado has ever had as well. So this is a big project. In particular for Colorado, it's a very large project. So this may sound bad, but the salvage logging operations and a lot of conservation groups have lined up against it for the most part. Could salvage logging actually create conditions that are more similar to post-fire conditions instead of post-beetle conditions, which gets to the heart of this question. So I've been working with them for 2.5 years, and I've been talking to them for 2.5 years about climate change and how we need to bring climate change into this. And we haven't had a chance to do this yet, although they have come around to this idea. But we've had these two other major kind of questions that we've had to address in the last 2.5 years that I think leads into this, hey, how could we maybe start to integrate climate change science into their management response to a climate change initiated event of this massive spruce beetle outbreak that they're dealing with. The first big question that we had to deal with was where on the landscape, and these questions you'll see we keep coming back to where. And I'm a geographer, so I'm obsessed with where. But I think in general it resonates a lot with this project. So where on the landscape can you minimize impacts and maximize benefits? Initially, the Forest Service proposed a blank slate. They wanted to be allowed to cut 60,000 acres wherever they deemed was a good place to cut. And there was tremendous pushback from county commissioners, conservation groups, hunters, you name it. Everybody was pushing back. They wanted to know where. So we asked this question of how could we potentially do some spatial optimization, prioritization modeling to start to say, hey, you've got over 1 million acres that you're dealing with that could, so these are all three of the forests together. Here's the Gunnison area up in here, but here are all three of the national forests together where they're proposing this. Where could you minimize impacts and maximize benefits? So they were selling this project as, hey, we want to reduce fire hazard to communities. We want to also produce timber. We don't want to impact lynx habitat and potential habitat. We want to minimize developing new roads. So how do you cut down this vast landscape and prioritize it? So we did, in my lab, we did this prioritization exercise, and this is just a little cartoon where we took that initial extent, we took out exclusions like wilderness areas, and then we worked with them and the community and the resource managers to start looking at different layers that would be important to bring into this, as well as how we rank them, how we rate them, and we come up with this end prioritization, which we go from this vast landscape, we cut it down to this landscape is a reasonable landscape to say this is where activities could occur, and not only that, but the higher the rating here that you got, the better it is in achieving multiple goals in terms of producing timber, as well as and protecting communities from wildfire, as well as minimizing impacts to lynx habitat, waterways, having to construct more roads, et cetera. So now the Forest Service is using this as their baseline template to propose any sort of actions on the landscape in terms of salvage. So that's great. We're starting to refine. We're starting to become more logical. We are also doing a lot of field work. I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of this, but just to convince you that we are out there with crews. We are going to a lot of sites on the landscape, and we're asking this question of where do we have spruce seedlings and how are sites responding to salvage logging. So we have on-the-ground data about how this is impacting seedling establishment across all these different kind of landscape gradients. And the idea is that this next year, I actually present this information tomorrow in Montrose, that then we will start integrating these concepts of this is boosted regression tree analysis. So these results of where seedlings are occurring on the landscape, that will be the next layer that will then go back into that optimization product to start saying, hey, if you don't want to have to replant following a salvage operation, these are places you should start to avoid on the landscape. So we're further refining that landscape and getting down to goals and objectives with this field work. But I think we can do a lot better. So what about climate change? The Climate Science Center has supported a project on spruce fir for us there over the last couple of years. So we already have that network established and a lot of baseline ideas and concepts established. How can we start to integrate some of these ideas of climate change, of species distribution changes, salvage logging, the dynamics of regeneration and migration in the context of different natural disturbance regimes, and how do we maybe start to say where on the landscape could we try to blend these things and bring these things in together to achieve different goals within this landscape in the context of maybe nudging this landscape towards adaptation. And lo and behold, Brian Miller here, sitting here with us, actually has a tool that could do this. This paper that came out very recently, just a couple of years ago now, combining state transition simulations and species distribution models to anticipate the effects of climate change. I'm not going to go into state transition simulation models, not just because I don't do them and don't fully understand how all of this would come together, in particular how all of our field data would come into this. But this is a great tool, I think, and maybe Brian can chime in here during question and answer, that we could start to take what we already have with the optimization modeling, with the on-the-ground information we have about how seedlings are responding to spruce beetle and salvage logging, where we think they're going to go, and we put them, I keep thinking about this in the context of a blender. Sorry, Brian, I know it's much more sophisticated than a blender, but all of these things can be integrated, and we can actually explore potential different outcomes and different trajectories. And then if we can integrate this into management, into that optimization map, and start to say, hey, what kinds of questions can we start refining and asking here, in particular, too, in the context of spruce, where could ecosystem management actions help spruce persist on the landscape? So places where the species distribution models project spruce will persist, where could we help that? Where could we help it either reestablish or persist in other ways with all of our knowledge about how it's responding to salvage, how it's responding to the spruce beetle outbreak. We also have we're starting to glean some information about how it responds to climate and weather variability. And then this other question of, it gets a little trickier, right? Where could ecosystem management actions facilitate species migration? So where might we be able to focus those salvage logging efforts in the context of all of these other variables that we're gathering information on, to say, hey, could we actually not only produce timber, protect communities from wildfire, not build more roads, not infringe on lynx habitat, and at the same time open up opportunities to facilitate the migration of more drought-tolerant species into these places where they currently are not on the landscape. So is this a possibility to add one more layer to this layer cake and start to push this landscape in this kind of adaptive direction? And the really interesting thing here, or I think exciting thing and opportunity here of integrating this stuff is we've already had this climate science center supported project here, so we already have a lot of that baseline and information and players and concepts and ideas. And the managers, after 2.5 years of listening to me babble about climate change, realize they're responding to climate change. And they are very much on board in terms of, okay, how could we do this? What are the possibilities of doing this? So I'll take any questions. This is big kind of concept perspective at this point in time, but yeah, and any ideas, I am very open to ideas of things. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Jason. Open for questions. I'm sure there's plenty out there. So, well, let me start things up, and I'm sure the questions you've heard. As you start looking at sort of the landscape restrictions that or priority areas that you've identified, how are those then going to be linked to the other areas? So you've probably reduced it down to maybe 10% of the extended area.
Yeah, about 15%, something like that, yeah.
But then you have the other areas that are needing to also be reseeding what sort of plans can you put in place to look at in this climate disturbance landscape, try to look at facilitating either seeding areas or sort of
so that's one of the things that we discussed in the project that the Science Center funded was, hey, instead of replanting spruce, and I think this is another place where these state transition models could help us explore this, instead of planting spruce in some of these sites, maybe we need to have a discussion and start thinking about and do some analysis to say, we don't want to pick the winner, right? We just don't really know how this is all going to play out, how quickly and what it's going to look like exactly. But nonetheless, we could diversify. So this is something that we've talked about actually, and the Forest Service is open to seed mixes. But once again, that question of where on the landscape. So where would it be logical to say, okay, let's plant some spruce, but let's also plant some Douglas fir, maybe ponderosa pine, so some more drought-adapted species. I mean, this is another place. The other place where this could feed in, I just focused on salvage logging because it's kind of the most mind-blowing idea that I can think of, that salvage logging could actually facilitate adaptation to climate change. But they are going to treat 60,000 acres of aspen. And right now, I don't want to make it sound like they're just shooting in the dark, but where to do those treatments. If you're going to have a prescribed fire, there are some ideas out there about where you will have the most success if you want to bring aspen back. But this is another place where you could integrate species distribution models with state transition models and explore ideas and options and say, okay, if managers do this, if drought is at this time of the sequence in the context of the timing in relationship to a prescribed fire, for example, what might be outcomes? And start to refine on the landscape. Where should you be doing this? If your objective is to bring aspen back, where on the landscape would be a logical place to do these treatments?
In your conversation with the managers, are they looking at the issue of heterogeneity and diversity in the mix of forest species in these various landscapes rather than having monocultures out there?
They are thinking about a lot of this. At the same time, they have a lot coming at them. They've lost a lot of their timber base, a lot of their forest in a very short period of time. And even initially when I came into the situation and said, hey, you're dealing with climate change. We have a project that spans this. The paper is in revision at a Journal of Ecology right now, talking about how we think this is a prime example of climate change impact. So the severity of this outbreak has changed in the context of past outbreaks. So it's a much higher severity event. Past outbreaks in this area would only take out 15 to 20% of the overstory trees. This is taking out nearly 100%. So I keep saying, hey, are you thinking about climate change? And they say, no, we're dealing with this massive spruce beetle outbreak and everything. I said, you're responding to it. And they have, I think that they're smart folks, and they're thinking about, how we adapt, how we change. Do we just plant spruce again? Their guidelines right now are telling them, plant spruce, this is how many you have to plant, and to get those spruce to survive, they have to put these, plastic cones around the seedlings that are 2- and 3-year-old seedlings just to get them to be able to survive on that site. And they're obviously, they're thinkers. They're saying, hey, this doesn't make sense. Even though we're putting protection around these seedlings, the vast majority of them on some of these sites are still dying. Maybe we should plant something else. So they're thinking about this. At the same time, they're working within the context of, here's what we're supposed to do post-harvest, is how many per acre, and we've got to try to make these things survive. Yeah.
My question is on monitoring, and I think you mentioned about, are giving you information. Is there any other way of gathering data? Is there any remote sensing technique? That's why you're thinking not only for gathering, also future monitoring.
Yeah, I wish we could pick up seedlings with remote sensing because, yeah, in reality, one of the big questions here is how we have all these resources being opened up. How is the forest responding? And we really didn't know at first. Will the forest be able to respond because you've just lost all of your seeds? So sometimes spruce seeds don't travel very far. So if you lose all of your overstory trees for a couple hundred meters, where's the seed going to come in from? And it doesn't have a long longevity in the seed bank and storage in the soil or duff. So at first there was a big question of, hey, is this whole thing going to kind of revert to shrubland, grassland or something? And it turns out there is a lot of regeneration, but a lot of the 4 to 6-year-old seedlings that we're interested in to see if there's a response to the outbreak. These crews are crawling around on hands and knees. These are a few centimeters tall. So unfortunately, I mean, maybe the CIA has something that could help us out, but so I think our best bet is we collect as much data as we can in the field. We're smart in terms of the stratification of those sites, and then if we're fortunate enough, we'll be able to actually model that landscape with some semblance of confidence that we know where high likelihood places for abundant spruce regen is and low likelihood. And I think that's we're starting to get there for that, but yeah.
For citizen science, hikers reporting to you?
You know, we don't have any citizen science involved in this yet. I think that we do field trips, and so tomorrow we'll have, I don't know, this is our annual stakeholders meeting. We'll probably have 80 folks there, and they have a working group. It is, you know, very well attended, and they have a tremendous, the few first initial meetings, I think we probably had 120, 140 people. So it is very closely watched, and I assume that those opportunities will come out over the next year probably, but up until this point in time, we've just been so under the gun to start refining, you know, what this project is, where everybody will agree to activities being able to occur on the landscape, and start to address some of these basic questions of, hey, if there's no spruce seedlings coming back, which was one of the arguments from the timber industry initially, was, hey, there's no regen, you know, it doesn't matter if we go in and salvage or not. Turns out there's a lot of regeneration out there, but it's in very specific locations and situations on the landscape. It also has this mosaic that's reflecting the timing of when the spruce beetles hit, how open the canopy was, were there seeds still available, and how did all those things line up with the wet spring of 2015. So if you were in the sweet spot where you still had viable seeds, but your canopy was opening up when the 2015 wet spring hit, you've got lots of spruce. So we'll actually see, I think, some stripes, some big, broad stripes on the landscape where, hey, this area, you know, this 15-kilometer wide strip of the mountains has a lot of spruce, and then, you know, the timing of wet periods, seed availability, and spruce beetles was not quite on over in this other 20-kilometer wide strip, and we have very little regeneration. So, but within that strip where we have lots of regeneration, it's responding very closely to topographic variables, the amount of the canopy that was killed, a lot of different variables. Yeah.
Hey, Jason, this is Jeff Morset, and thanks a lot. That was great. And sorry for joining late, but thanks, Dennis, for getting kicked off, as well as Jill and others there. The question I've had, and I've iterated, and Brian and I have talked a little bit about this, with the state and transition modeling, and maybe you and Brian can answer, is how feasible is it to do kind of an integration of the state and transition modeling to this type of project, with respect to kind of limited funds, and we don't want to start a whole 2 or 3 year new project to integrate state and transition modeling, but rather, kind of are we at a point, and this is kind of the question to Brian, to kind of attend such workshops, or the workshops that Jason is putting on, and then trying to do some state transition simulations, and then the question for Jason would be, how willing would they be to sort of be listened to and then say, okay, here's a computerized technical or automated way to play out the simulations. I'm just kind of so in general, the question is on the practicalities of doing something like this a little more operational than we've done now.
Sure. Hey, Jeff, it's Brian. So I think, the first thing we'd want to establish is, are folks, management folks kind of amenable to this sort of approach would be useful to them and seem like something they would sort of trust. And then the thing at least I'm kind of noticing, and I don't know if Amy's on the call or others from the SimStat funded project in Badlands area, is when, building a model that is being attuned to management needs, there's certainly some balance of model complexity and abstraction there, which, I think in some ways can be counterintuitive. I think that the model we're building for the Badlands area is maybe more complex than we initially envisioned from the project team's perspective, because as we went, there were managers and others in the room and in the workshops would go, well, what about, have you included this, and what about that? Did you include, this aspect of, seed dispersal and this and that? And we can build those things in, but it can be a bit of a runaway train. And so putting sidewalls on, okay, how much time do we have to do this? And then really being clear up front about, hey, we've got X months, X years, this is basically, we're going to have to make some simplifications at some point along the line, and are people comfortable with that? So, Jason, wants to jump in?
Yeah, in terms of, I have not done this type of modeling, so I don't really know the nuts and bolts and how time intensive that's going to be. I do know that we have a lot of field data, pre and post harvest. We have controls, and it's pretty detailed and I think a good data set. So that's a great head start. I think the other thing is we do have, I've been hammering climate change for 2.5, maybe it's more like 3 years now, and they are very on board with this idea, and they are ready even to they have a perspective of, hey, everything we do is an experiment, and especially in the context of a warming or shifting climate, it's even more of an experiment than we could ever imagine. So they have that perspective. They're willing to adapt. So I think that it's not only that they're willing to listen and participate and put people's time and effort in towards this, but they are willing to adapt their management plans. It may take 2 to 3 years for that to play out on the ground once we would have some results, but this is, in reality, this project will be going on for the next 12 years. So there's a lot of acres that can be influenced in how this treatment plays out. And they're on board to the point that they hired Carlin Perovich, my former master's student, where they're looking at their forest plan revision now and working with her, talking about how they integrate climate change into their forest plan revision, which will guide their forest for the next probably 20 years or so. So they're amazingly on board, and they're seeing it in front of their eyes every day. So they realize they're dealing with something new and novel. And I think they're also, even the timber folks are saying, in the context of what do we plant after these treatments, if we are going to replant, that should we be diversifying? Should we be planting something else that will be better suited and adapted to this site? Because the mill in Montrose, the only substantial mill in the state of Colorado, they're investing in equipment that's, I don't know what the return period is on it, but it's well past this 12-year time scale. So they're trying to look long term, and that resource extraction, if the folks in you know, in some of the resort communities, even though they might not like it, it's a part of that landscape, it's a part of that community, and I think it's, you know, they would like to be part of that landscape well into the future past this one large project. So people are generally on board and willing to actually act on these things, which is a very unusual situation. I've even been told that we can sit down and, you know, divide up a landscape and start to come up with different prescriptions and have a control landscape, but different cutting strategies, different planning strategies on maybe 3 or 4 different scenarios that we could actually work with.
Yeah, I think it seems to me it's a great opportunity to do some of these simulation modeling work with what-if management questions, and especially with the Southwest South Dakota project having developed a set of climate scenarios, you know, maybe we could use that as a jumping off point for modeling a smaller set of climate futures, and then also, you know, developing, okay, here's the 4, 5, 6 management alternatives we might also explore, and then.
So it seems like the biggest knowledge gap is in the determination, establishment period of these different species. And if you have, you know, try to capture what climate envelope that is really useful to plan to where you plant, how you plant, using a simulation model, I don't think we have the data or the knowledge to really do that. We may have some good guesses that we could incorporate in the models, but, you know, there's just not good field data on that germination and establishment phase.
Well, we're narrowing that down for spruce. In this area, we're narrowing it down for spruce.
I don't know if we could take advantage of FIA data at all. I don't know if they do work on seedlings at all, or if that's included in the FIA data set.
Yeah.
Except for the intensives. Intensives, they do some sampling for recovery. But most of it, they don't start until DPH, right?
Yeah. I think, but we do, on the aspen end of things, we have a better idea of that dynamic. So that would be, you know, in the context of climate variability as well as, but there you also need to start taking into account an ungulate browse pressure.
Yeah, then we ask, you know, someone like Imtiaz about how comfortable he is from the climate projection side, climate scenarios, to use enough detailed, you know, really fine resolution implications of the climate information that we have.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not, you know, because of the landscape relationships, unless we have mechanistic downscaling that really covers, you know, sort of the temperature, you know, snow field, you know, where they collect, you know, you get that snow collection, precip, it's law of interpolation of information of general, you know, 50-kilometer resolution.
Yeah, I think in the context of actually planning any management activities, you would be focused on locations in the landscape where you think there's a high probability of this potential outcome, right? And we're always going to have a lot of uncertainty. We can't cut all of it down, which in your paper you embrace this uncertainty and say, hey, this is out there, and I think that you cut down the uncertainty in terms of location, in terms of space, but cutting down an uncertainty in terms of time and that temporal dynamic of weather from year to year, and if we get an El Nino or a La Nina or a La Nina that thinks it's an El Nino or whatever it is, if we spread those treatments out, or if we spread whatever the prescription is out through time, but we are consistent in space in terms of, hey, these are the locations on the landscape where we think we're likely to be able to push it in this, nudge it in this direction. Because in reality, you know, we just don't, even a year out. You know, I was assuming that this was going to be another El Nino year, looking at 500 years worth of tree ring records. I was like, the strength of this one is likely to persist another year, and well, you know, surprise, surprise. So we could have all kinds of forecasts, but I think that that's a little
Yeah.
But if we spread that out through time, that we're consistent in terms of how we're viewing the spatial dynamics of that landscape, hopefully some of those outcomes. But the other thing is we could be super conservative, and we only focus on spruce persistence in places in the landscape where all of these model runs are consistently telling us that this one location on the landscape, because of wind-driven snow accumulation or something, it is so decoupled from the regional climate that it is sufficiently decoupled that it's could be considered a refugia site. And we could even go out in the field and say, do we see even spruce regeneration during the 2000 or 2002 drought year? I think that would be a fantastic, so we can age seedlings and saplings. And if you see regeneration during those 2 years, for example, there's a pretty doggone good chance that it's going to be able to regenerate, because 2002 is average climate mid-century, in theory, our 2002 conditions in the state. So, over the next 10, 12 years of the lifespan of this project, it would probably be a pretty good bet that if it's that decoupled, that it would be a safe place to do those types of activities. But yeah, there's always going to be, you're always going to have to roll the dice a little bit on its ecology, right? So it's a natural system.
Jason, hi, this is Imtiaz Rangwala. Thanks for a nice presentation. I know you were involved to some degree in the Southwest Colorado project discussion, at least towards the end. And and you, I guess, when you referred to the CSC project, I was guessing you were talking about that very project. So I'm wondering, because in that project, of course, we had the climate piece where we brought in the different climate scenarios. The time horizon there was, of course, 2035, so early to mid-term. And that's one of my questions, is that, in your strain transition modeling that you're thinking, is the time horizon of relevance. But more importantly, I wanted to ask, in the project, we came up with the more conceptual, qualitative ecosystem response models, again, developed using both the universal kind of understanding, but also kind of local knowledge of how the systems were responding. And there was kind of, we found there was difference in the value of incorporating local knowledge. And then we had, towards the end, the idea that, we can bring more quantification into that ecosystem response model, which kind of never happened. I did have a conversation with Brian at that a couple times that maybe you could bring in state and transition modeling into that. So maybe this is a good opportunity where, some of that information, maybe you're already thinking on those lines, that was developed in that project, could be incorporated in the state and transitioning model.
Yeah, so on the time horizon, I work with long-lived species. All these species that I'm mentioning can make it to 400 or 500 years without much of an issue. So I know that our confidence in projecting climate starts to go downhill very rapidly if we get out past 2050, 2060. But nonetheless, I think that we should be thinking as long-term as we can in the context of tree species and their maturing to being a seed-producing individual, et cetera. So I would want to push that as much as we can, and probably as much as you would feel comfortable. And once again, I think that I would personally feel more comfortable falling back onto what I was saying to Dennis, that we really try to identify those places on the landscape that are very much decoupled from regional climate. In the context of spruce, at least, but that wouldn't be the case necessarily on these other species. In terms of piggybacking what's already been done, I think that that's a strength of this project. Is what I would say is, hey, Brian's got these models and these concepts of how to integrate these things that I think is a very nice path forward. And I have on-the-ground data from this region. I have relationships with these managers who are now willing to experiment with their landscape and incorporate climate change. And on top of that, we have the Southwest Project. We don't leave any of that behind. We use those people. We use the network. We use those ideas. You know, I've got big plans for you, so don't schedule too much. So I think, you know, this, to me, this looks like low-hanging fruit. You know, there's already been this Climate Science Center project there, so we've already got that going. We know the players. We know some of those concerns. We have those conceptual models. There's already been some species distribution models been run there, different climate scenarios. So I view this as we have a lot of pieces from people, concepts, models, on-the-ground field data. The big question would be, you know, how do we bring this together and try to, you know, have a 1 + 1 + 1 = 10 kind of outcome. I think the potential's there, and I would hope that it's not a high budget kind of scenario either, because we already have so many pieces in place, and I think that yeah, it's waiting to, you know, how all those things come together could be a very tricky thing, I know, but I think that it is low-hanging fruit in my opinion.
Now, this is a great, you know, sort of opportunity, and getting exposed to this has been really super. And this type of leveraging is something that we're really trying to look at really closely and trying to facilitate this type of adaptive management activity and really integrating across different. So we'll take this. Let me maybe turn it back over to the rest of the group for their updates in the last sort of 7 minutes that we have. And maybe start with Jeff and Aparna, if you want to introduce our new sort of member of the team, Jeff.
Yeah, sure. Thanks a lot, Dennis. Within time before the hiring freeze, the North Central was able to bring on Aparna Bamzai as a deputy director to help us out. It's going to be excellent to have the extra person, especially someone who's coming with so much experience. So Aparna was on the university side of the South Central Climate Science Center, has done amazing things there, well connected with the network, well aware of kind of how the CSCs operate. So we're extremely pleased that she applied and we were able to bring her on. We'll be posting on the website her bio and sending out a notification to our email list kind of with kind of her background, so you'll get to know her a little bit more. But maybe I'll turn it over to Aparna in case she wants to say hello and introduce herself with anything I missed.
Thanks, Jeff. I just will really quickly say that I'm very excited to be on the team and to learn more about what's unique about the North Central CSC in the region and to see how I can pitch in.
Great, yeah, and I think it's going to be some cross, you know, like we'll learn what worked well in the CSC and or the South Central, and kind of vice versa, and we'll be able to build on that, the best of both. So, welcome aboard.
And so, sort of from the center perspective, too, we're sort of moving into our site review, which will be next week. We have our second webinar this afternoon, starting at 1 to 2:30 with the. Oh, tomorrow. Thank you. Tomorrow on Wednesday with the site review team, getting them up to speed. Jeff gave one last week. Jeff and the staff here gave a webinar last week to get them primed up, and then we'll do the second one tomorrow. And then next week, starting Tuesday, we have a 3-day in-person site review. So a lot of you are involved with that, or at least a lot of the information that you've shared and developed for the Climate Science Center will be talked about over the next week or so. I don't know if there's any quick updates from MTIs or Andy. I don't see Shannon on there. I don't think we have anything from the adaptation at this point.
I'm on. I have a couple quick updates, actually. I want to get in before we lose people.
Okay, go ahead. Let's start with you,
so,
Andy. And then
okay. Yeah, so one is just to let everybody know that the adaptation team has a paper that was accepted that's coming out in climate risk management. We'll send that around when it's available, called Expanding Vulnerability Assessment for Public Lands, the Complement to Ecological Approaches. So that's a review paper looking at how social science and social vulnerability can add to understanding vulnerability on public lands, especially in the context of multi-use agencies like the BLM, which we focused on. This is a paper that we wrote as part of our Colorado BLM vulnerability assessment project. So keep an eye out for that. And then the other one has to do with the National Climate Assessment. And I am one of the authors on the Northern Great Plains Regional Chapter, and we have Doug Clucks on the phone. So Doug, I'm hoping maybe you can chime in here. We've got a regional stakeholder input meeting on the books for February 22nd and 23rd. So if people can mark their calendars for that, the primary meeting is going to be in Rapid City, and there's going to be some satellite meetings, I believe, that are happening concurrently. I believe we're going to be hosting one in Fort Collins at the North Central Climate Science Center. So Doug, if you're still on and listening, can you maybe let people know a little bit more about that meeting?
Yeah, so hi everyone. The meeting, like Shannon said, will be in Rapid City on February 22nd. The 23rd will be an authors team meeting, I believe. So don't pencil that day in unless you're Shannon. It's what they call a listening session, and it's being done in every region for the National Climate Assessment around the country, pretty much in the next 2 months. Those will be concluded. There are pathways through Shannon and myself and Rich Conant, who is the lead author he's actually at Colorado State University, in case you don't know. He's the lead author for the Northern Plains, so if you happen to know him, you can tell him what you think. But Shannon, you might, we have I guess what I'd say is a kind of skeletal outline of some of the key messages or key issues for this region, which is North and South Dakota, as well as Nebraska, Wyoming, and Montana. So as you can see, it's a widely varying landscape. From, east of the Missouri is quite lush, relatively speaking, and then it sort of dries out to semi-arid, and then, all the mountain issues that come into play. I think we were just talking about one a little bit earlier, as a matter of fact. So there's a lot to talk about, but we don't have a lot of room, and so that's sort of the crux of what we're getting at here. And if you sort of want to listen to where we're going and some of the key issues and all that kind of stuff, the February 22nd would be good. The other listening post, if you will be in Lincoln, Nebraska. Now, nothing has been sent out officially on this, which I'm a little dismayed at, but we need to get the information out as soon as possible to a broad audience. So, Shannon, yours and Jeff's and Dennis's network there definitely will get all of this when it comes out, as well as other networks that we're involved with.
That's great, Doug. Well, thanks. Thanks for the update, Shannon. MTIs and Andy, anything quick to report?
So this is MTIs. Just a couple quick things which are actually already entered in the Excel sheet as well. Our groups resubmitted this manuscript on the uncertainty that arise from methodological choices in computing potential evapotranspiration, and the kind of divergence and the risk that comes out of it. And so we just submitted that end of December. If anybody's interested in the revised copy, let me know. Regarding the Eddy Drought Index, I kind of mentioned to some of you that we have this real-time maps which was initially we had it hosted on the Western Water dashboards. Now the release to the NOAA Physical Sciences Division website for the whole CONUS area. And we also are in the process of getting historical data for EDDI for research purposes, something that could be used for all kind of drought-related impacts for ecologists. And this basically, the effort in doing this is because we have had requests from ecologists for this data set, and they've been using it. So that should be out, I'm hoping, within a couple of weeks. So that's all for me.
Yeah, and Andy here, I can be brief. Jason, great presentation. It really seems like an interesting project to basically meld management with field data collection, with modeling, to get after these interesting issues of trying to manage under climate change. We actually just had a conference call with the Yellowstone Whitebark Pine Subcommittee this morning on very similar topics, where Katie Ireland presented results of modeling with Fire BGC of whitebark pine performance under different climate scenarios and under different management scenarios. And the subcommittee was really interested in the results. So increasingly, it seems like the CSC can be moving towards, workshops and collective activities, trying to bring together, these different projects that meld climate, vegetation management, adaptive management, et cetera. And then in brief, Jeff Morissette helped Tony Chang, one of our graduate students who's been affiliated with the center, get selected for a Smith Fellowship from the Nature Conservancy. Really
Andy, I did very little compared to what Tony and you all accomplished, but thanks for the shout out and thanks for mentioning it. But yeah, the credits to Tony and you guys there.
And then just in the project, Arjuna's been making good progress on looking at PET and water balance issues under different PET formulations and under different GCMs. And we're going to be summarizing some of those results in the call tomorrow. So I won't, Arjuna, I think given the time, we probably can just leave it at that and share some of those results tomorrow. That's all I have.
And hopefully you'll send your talk to us soon today, so we'll have it prepared for tomorrow.
And maybe this reminds me, and I'm running between meetings, but let's make sure maybe we can get a news item and work with Tony on kind of that announcement to let people know that good news. Maybe. Okay, thanks.
We'll get it to you when we can, Dennis. We're scrambling.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll email you, Andy.
Thank you all. I guess one sort of administrative note, there's an interesting occurrence yesterday out of the Trump administration where he has now frozen all grants and external funding to the EPA. Has a lot of people concerned. But keep an eye on things. There's a lot more federal censorship going on as well and emerging. So need for further support between federal university partnerships to get some of this support for the type of things that we're doing. So hang in there. It's a scary time. Thanks.
Thanks, Dennis, for running the meeting and getting it set up, Jill. So, yeah. Thanks. Take care. Have a good day.